When someone stops texting back, the first thing that happens is panic mode, right? You start thinking, did I say something wrong? Did I do something to push them away? And then the chase begins. You send another text, you double down, you start trying to win them back, and that's exactly the moment you give your power away. Here's the truth. When an avoidant person pulls back, it's not an invitation for you to lose yourself. It's a test of whether you can stay grounded. Your value hasn't changed just because they stopped replying. The question is, can you hold your standards? Can you keep your energy? And can you show that you're not dependent on their validation? Because the moment you start chasing, you teach them that they can pull away anytime, and you'll still fight for them. The real power is in staying calm, staying connected to your life, and letting them feel the space they created without rewarding it with pursuit. That's how you keep your power. When someone with avoidant tendencies stops texting back, the first thing most people feel is a rush of anxiety. That silence feels like rejection, and immediately your brain starts searching for answers. What did I do wrong? Did I say too much? Did I push too hard? Before you know it, your self-worth becomes tied to whether or not they reply. And this is the trap that so many fall into, the belief that their response, or lack of it, determines your value. The truth is, their behavior says far more about them than it does about you. But in the moment, it doesn't feel that way. It feels personal. It feels like your worth just dropped because they didn't validate you in the way you hoped they would. The problem with attaching your worth to someone else's response is that it immediately puts them in control. Every time they text you back, you feel relief. Every time they don't, you spiral. That roller coaster is exhausting because it means your emotional state is completely dependent on another person's actions. That's not power, that's giving your power away. Your worth cannot fluctuate based on whether someone hits send on their phone. It has to be rooted in something deeper, something that isn't at the mercy of someone else's inconsistency. When an avoidant person pulls away, it's usually about their own patterns, their own fears, or their own discomfort with closeness. It's not your job to fix that, and it's certainly not proof that you aren't enough. What happens, though, is that instead of recognizing this, people start overcompensating. They think, if I can just show them how amazing I am, they'll come back. And so they send the extra text, they craft the perfect message, they start performing in hopes of winning their attention again. But all of that behavior is coming from a place of lack. It's saying, your attention defines me, and if you take it away, I have to work harder to feel valuable again. That is not the energy you want to live in because it will drain you and keep you trapped in dynamics where you're constantly proving yourself. Here's what has to shift. You have to see their silence for what it really is. Not a reflection of you, but a reflection of where they are. Their pulling away doesn't change your qualities, your character, or what you bring to the table. It doesn't erase the value you've always had. When you anchor into that, you stop reacting out of fear. Instead of scrambling to get a reply, you remember, I was valuable before this, and I'm valuable now. That mindset creates calm, where there used to be panic. And when you're calm, you make better decisions. You're not trying to chase, you're not trying to prove anything. You're simply living in a way that reflects your confidence. The truth is, the only reason someone else's silence feels so loud is because of the story you tell yourself about it. If the story is, they're not replying because I'm not enough, then of course it's going to hurt. But if the story is, they're not replying because that's how they handle things and that's on them, then you reclaim control over your emotions. You don't need to villainize them or excuse them, but you do need to stop letting their choices dictate how you feel about yourself. Your worth doesn't go up when someone shows up, and it doesn't go down when someone pulls away. It stays constant, and the more you believe that, the less power their silence has over you. When you understand this at a deep level, you become immune to that panic because you're not waiting for their validation to confirm what you already know about yourself. The moment someone stops texting back, there is an almost automatic instinct that kicks in. It's that urge to close the gap, to eliminate the discomfort of not knowing where you stand. You feel the need to reach out, to check in, to somehow make them respond so you can feel secure again. That urge is powerful because it comes from fear. Fear of losing the connection, fear of being forgotten, fear that something is wrong. So you start thinking, maybe if I send a funny message, maybe if I remind them of a good moment we shared, maybe if I show them I'm still here, they'll reply. And the more time that passes, the more that fear grows, until it becomes a need to do something, anything, to get a reaction. That is the chase instinct, and it is one of the easiest ways to lose your power in this situation. The problem with chasing is that it immediately shifts the dynamic. When you start chasing someone who is pulling away, you're teaching them that they can set the pace of the relationship, and you will always adjust to it. They pull back, you lean in, they go silent, you try harder, and what happens then? They learn that they don't have to put in consistent effort to keep you around because you'll do the work for both of you. Every time you chase, you're sending a message without realizing it. You're saying, I need your attention to feel okay, and I'm willing to ignore the fact that you're not meeting me halfway just to keep this going. That's a dangerous place to operate from because it puts all the power in their hands and leaves you running on empty. Chasing doesn't just affect the dynamic with the other person, it affects how you feel about yourself. You might think it's harmless to send one more message, but it rarely stops at one. It becomes a pattern of over-investing in someone who isn't investing back. And every time you do that, a part of you knows that you're abandoning your own needs to try to secure theirs. That internal conflict eats away at your self-respect. You start to feel smaller, less confident, and more dependent on their responses for validation. And the irony is, the more you chase, the less likely they are to respond in the way you want. Not because they're trying to hurt you, but because people value what they feel they could lose, not what they know they can take for granted. When you're always available, always reaching out, always proving your interest, there's no sense of urgency for them to step up. Why would they, when they know you'll close the gap every time? Another reason chasing backfires is that it comes across as pressure, even when you don't intend it to. If someone has avoidant tendencies, their pulling away is usually a way for them to create space and feel safe. When you start chasing, even out of care, it feels like an invasion of that space. They're already feeling overwhelmed, and now they feel like they have to manage your emotions on top of their own discomfort. That doesn't make them want to come closer. It makes them want to retreat even more. So the very thing you think will bring them back actually pushes them further away. It's not fair, it's not logical, but it's how human behavior works when someone is wired to withdraw under pressure. The hardest part of resisting the chase is sitting with the discomfort. It feels unnatural not to act. You feel like you're letting the connection die, like you're not doing enough, like if you just try a little harder, you can fix it. But here's what's really happening when you don't chase. You're sending a different message, not to them, but to yourself. You're saying, I trust myself enough not to act out of fear. I trust that if this connection is right, I don't have to beg for it to stay. That message is powerful because it reinforces your own value instead of outsourcing it. Every time you resist that urge, you strengthen your ability to stay calm under uncertainty. You remind yourself that you don't need to earn love by overextending, and you start attracting situations where effort is mutual instead of one-sided. When someone stops texting you back, one of the most common reactions is to pause your own life without even realizing it. You keep checking your phone, waiting for that notification, refreshing your messages just in case something came through while you weren't looking. Slowly, your attention starts to revolve around them and what they're doing or not doing. Before you know it, your energy is consumed by this waiting game, and everything else in your life begins to take a back seat. The problem is, this creates an even bigger gap between you and your sense of power, because now you've shifted from living your life to living in limbo, hoping for their response. That state of limbo is exhausting because it keeps you stuck in a cycle where your happiness feels like it's on hold until they come back. Staying anchored in your life means the exact opposite of that. It means you refuse to abandon the things that make you feel alive, confident, and fulfilled just because someone else isn't showing up the way you hoped they would. This isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about making a conscious decision not to let someone else's inconsistency interrupt your flow. because the truth is, your life is still happening whether they respond or not. There are opportunities, relationships, experiences, and moments of joy waiting for you every single day, but you can't access them if all your energy is tied up in waiting for a message. The reason it's so important to keep your routines, passions, and social energy alive during these moments is because that's where your confidence is rooted. When you're focused on what you love, your work, your hobbies, your friends, your growth, you naturally feel more grounded. You feel like yourself. And when you feel like yourself, you make better choices. You're less likely to send that desperate text. You're less likely to bend your standards just to keep someone around. You're less likely to give in to anxiety-driven behavior because you're already fulfilled in other areas. But when you abandon those things and put your entire sense of happiness in someone else's hands, you give them a power they were never meant to have. Think about it like this. When your world becomes small and revolves around one person, any shift in their attention feels massive. If they pull back, your whole world feels like it's collapsing because they were at the center of it. But when you keep your world big, with friends, passions, goals, routines, someone pulling back barely shakes the surface. It still stings, but it doesn't feel like your life is falling apart because your identity isn't tied to their behavior. That's why staying anchored is non-negotiable. It's not just a distraction tactic. It's a mindset that says, I value my life enough to keep living it fully, regardless of who shows up or doesn't. Another reason this matters so much is because energy is magnetic. When you're fully engaged in your life, people feel it. There's a confidence and self-assuredness that comes from being connected to something bigger than a single relationship. That energy draws the right people to you and keeps you attractive to the ones who matter. On the other hand, when you're stuck in waiting mode, when your days are consumed by checking your phone and wondering what they're doing, that energy is heavy. It feels needy, even if you never say a word. People can sense when you've abandoned yourself, and it changes the dynamic in ways you might not realize. Anchoring yourself in your life doesn't just protect your power, it also gives you clarity. When you're living fully, it's easier to see whether someone actually deserves a place in your world. Because when your world is rich and full, you're not desperate for someone to stay. You're discerning. You're able to ask, do they add value to my life? Do they show up consistently? Do they align with what I want for myself? Those questions are hard to answer when your identity is tied to them, but they're much easier when your identity is anchored in you. That's why the goal is never to shrink your life to fit someone else's inconsistency. The goal is to make your life so fulfilling that no one person becomes the center of it, because the moment they do, you've given away the power that was always meant to stay with you. When someone stops texting back, the first reaction most people have is emotional. It feels like rejection. It feels like abandonment. And that rush of panic hits before you can even process what's happening. Your heart starts racing. Your mind begins crafting stories about why they're pulling away. And almost immediately, you feel the urge to react. Maybe you want to send a follow-up message. Maybe you want to confront them. Or maybe you want to show your hurt by pulling back in a dramatic way. All of that comes from the same place, a desperate need to regain control over a situation that feels uncertain. The problem is, acting from that panic doesn't just hurt your chances of getting the response you want. It damages your sense of power because it shows you're letting someone else's behavior dictate your emotional state. Responding with calm instead of panic doesn't mean you ignore what you're feeling. It means you regulate those feelings before you act. When you operate from panic, your behavior becomes reactive, and reactive behavior almost always comes across as needy or defensive. For example, sending multiple messages because you can't handle the silence sends a very different signal than calmly waiting and deciding later whether you even want to engage. The first one says, "My emotional stability depends on your attention." The second says, "I'm secure enough to hold my ground and take my time." That difference is everything, and it starts with creating a pause before you act on your emotions. That pause is powerful because it gives you space to separate your feelings from your actions. Feelings aren't the problem. They're human, they're natural, and they're valid. But when feelings start running the show, you end up doing things that hurt you in the long run. You might text something you regret, or you might over-explain yourself to someone who isn't even asking for an explanation. You might even lash out and then feel guilty later. All of these are normal impulses when you're triggered, but they don't align with the confident, grounded person you want to be. Responding calmly isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about giving yourself enough space to choose a response that reflects strength, not fear. Remaining calm also changes the energy of the interaction. When someone pulls back and you respond with panic, they feel it, even through a screen. The tone of your messages, the timing, the frequency, it all communicates anxiety. And for someone who already feels like they need space, that anxiety becomes pressure, which makes them want to withdraw even more. But when your energy is neutral and composed, it sends a very different message. I'm okay regardless of what you do. That creates a sense of security instead of pressure, and it shifts the dynamic away from desperation toward mutual respect. Calm energy is attractive because it shows emotional stability, and emotional stability is magnetic. Practically speaking, staying calm means focusing on what you can control rather than obsessing over what you can't. You can't control whether someone replies or how quickly they do it. You can control whether you drop everything to obsess over them or whether you keep living your life. You can control the tone of your response, the timing of your response, and whether you even choose to respond at all. When you're calm, you give yourself options. When you're panicked, it feels like there's only one option: do something now. That sense of urgency is almost always an illusion, and the more you practice slowing down, the more you realize that not every silence demands a reaction. Another important part of responding calmly is managing the story you tell yourself in that silence. If your mind is spinning with thoughts like, "They're ignoring me because I'm not good enough," of course you'll feel panic. That story is terrifying. But if the story is, "They're dealing with their own stuff, and it's not my job to fix it," or even, "This might not be about me at all," then the emotional intensity drops. It's not about convincing yourself they'll come back. It's about detaching your self-worth from their behavior so you can respond from a place of security instead of fear. Because the truth is, the calmer you are, the clearer you think, and the clearer you think, the better choices you make for yourself. When someone stops texting back, the temptation is to focus entirely on what you can do to make them respond again. You start thinking about how to phrase the next message, whether to wait or send something funny, whether to post something that might catch their attention. But very rarely do people stop to ask the more important question: what behavior am I willing to accept? Because the truth is, not everyone deserves unlimited access to you. Not everyone deserves your time, your attention, or your energy. And if you don't decide where the line is, someone else will decide it for you, and it usually won't be in your favor. Boundaries are what keep you from being pulled into dynamics that leave you feeling small, unappreciated, or drained. They are the rules that you create for your own emotional well-being. And if you don't have them, you end up settling for whatever scraps of effort someone decides to give you. Deciding what behavior you accept isn't about being harsh, it's about being clear. It's about saying to yourself, "I know what respect looks like for me, and I refuse to compromise on that just because I'm afraid of losing someone." Because that fear of loss is exactly what makes people abandon their boundaries. They start with high standards, but the moment someone pulls away, they start negotiating against themselves. Maybe it's okay if they take a day to reply. Maybe it's okay if they go missing for a week. Maybe it's okay if I'm always the one initiating. Little by little, you start allowing behavior that makes you feel undervalued. And before you know it, you've trained the other person to give you the bare minimum while you keep giving more and more. That dynamic doesn't happen overnight. It happens because of all the small moments where you told yourself, "It's fine, I'll let this slide." The reason this is so dangerous is because it creates a habit. Once you accept inconsistency as normal, it becomes harder to hold anyone accountable, including yourself. You start to believe that you don't deserve consistency, that this is just how relationships are, that wanting more makes you needy. But none of that is true. You are allowed to want consistency. You are allowed to expect someone to show up in a way that matches their words. You are allowed to require effort from someone who wants a place in your life. These are not unreasonable expectations. They are the foundation of healthy connection. The problem is, When you're emotionally invested in someone, your fear of losing them can blind you to the fact that you're accepting far less than what makes you happy. So, how do you decide what behavior you accept? You start by getting honest about what actually works for you and what doesn't. Do you feel anxious when someone disappears for days without explanation? Do you feel taken for granted when you're always the one initiating? Do you feel secure when communication is steady and mutual? These are questions you need to answer for yourself because no one else can set those standards for you. Once you know what matters to you, you have to back it up with action. That means if someone consistently ignores your needs, you don't keep rewarding them with more access. You don't keep overcompensating for their lack of effort. You make decisions that align with your standards, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means walking away from someone you really like. Because the truth is, every time you allow behavior that doesn't work for you, you're not just lowering your standards. You're teaching yourself that your needs don't matter. And nothing erodes self-esteem faster than living in a way that contradicts your own values. Boundaries are not about controlling someone else. They're about controlling what you will and won't allow in your life. You can't force someone to text you back. You can't force someone to communicate in the way you want. But you can decide what happens if they don't. You can decide whether you keep investing in someone who disappears without explanation or whether you pull back and protect your energy. You can decide whether you let someone's inconsistency dictate your worth or whether you walk away from that dynamic entirely. Those decisions are what keep your power intact because they remind you that you are not at the mercy of anyone else's behavior. You have a choice, and the more you practice exercising that choice, the stronger you become, the clearer your standards become, and the less likely you are to end up in situations where you feel powerless. Even though someone has stopped texting you back, it's easy to let your mind obsess over what's happening on their side of the screen. You start analyzing everything, what they're thinking, why they're acting distant, what you might have said wrong. That spiral of overthinking feels almost uncontrollable because you're desperate for certainty in a situation that feels uncertain. But here's the truth. The more energy you put into solving the mystery of someone else's silence, the more disconnected you become from yourself. You stop paying attention to your own emotions, your own needs, and your own state of mind because you're too focused on reading theirs. And that is where you lose your center. When you start trying to decode someone else, you abandon the most important relationship you have, the one with yourself.